Hey everyone, welcome back to the Invest in Yourself podcast. Today I'm joined by Mafia historian and author Sandra Petty. She recently just wrote a book about Sonny Franzese, the Colombo crime family underboss at one time. Sandra got to meet Sonny before he passed away. She interviewed him a few times and even got the permission to write his life story. Sandra interviewed many people that were close to Sonny to make this book happen. This book is a very informative read and I highly recommend it to anyone that enjoys Mafia history. Please subscribe to my channel to get more interviews like this, and without further ado, let's get into Sandra's story about Sonny Franzese. Hey Sandra, how you doing?
Hi, Adrian.
Thank you for coming on my show. I appreciate you taking out some time.
Well, thank you for asking me. I'm excited. This is different.
Yeah, well, me too. I really enjoyed your book that you wrote about Sonny Franzese. And another thing that we'll bring up as well is you had mentioned that there's not a whole lot of, woman authors that write books about the mob bosses. You said there's the mob wives and then the daughters and stuff, but I mean you're the one of the first that I suppose ever seen through my time reading all these books that a woman author. So that's another interesting fun fact about you. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, I don't think there are any other mob books about a mob boss. Sonny Franzese was the Colombo crime family underboss.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there are any other books like that by women. And the reason my pen name on the book is S.J. Petty is because my editor wanted me to do that. He had never published a mob book by a woman before. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he was worried that people wouldn't buy it. And I think he's right. I know that sounds weird,
yeah.
But the core audience for this book tend to be mob buffs who tend to be men. Mm-hmm. But what I was trying to do with this book was go beyond the mafia and talk about who Sonny was as a man, as a mm-hmm. father, and as a husband. Because you don't really see that in a lot of mafia books. And he was very open with me about that. He wasn't open about the mafia. I once asked him about omerta, and he said, "Ooh, what's that? What are you talking about?" As if. I don't think he ever even said the word mafia in all the interviews I did with him.
So. Oh, wow. Really? Yeah. So when you encountered him, how did this all go down? Like, where did you meet him, and how did you get this relationship built to him where he would even allow an interview?
Well, the story, Michael Franzese was in New York because he was giving a talk. Michael Franzese, who is Sonny's stepson, he was giving a talk. He's an evangelical pastor. And so I interviewed him about the mafia related to something else. And at the end of the interview, he mentioned that he was going up to Devens, Massachusetts to see his dad, who was 100 years old, and he was the oldest living inmate in the federal prison system.
Wow.
And knowing Michael as I do now, he was just dangling a little shiny object in front of me because he knew any reporter would go for that.
Oh, yeah.
So I covered Sonny's release from prison and then, of course, had to talk to him. He didn't talk to me when he got out of prison. It took about 9 months working through various people to finally get to his nursing home. And the really sad story about Sonny is he was once this very powerful and feared man and widely admired. He is still widely admired on the street, but he wound up in a nursing home in Queens, New York for, as his friend put it, for the indigent, because no one in his family was willing or able to take him home.
Yeah.
So I interviewed him half a dozen times in the nursing home. And every time I brought food because Italians like food. And maybe he was manipulating me. I don't know. But the first time we met, the aide brought over a lunch tray with rice and vegetables. And he just hid it. And he said, "I'm so sick of this crap." I said, "Well, what do you want? I'll bring you whatever you want." And he looked at me and he said, "Pasta fazool." A very simple peasant dish that, by the way, is not easy to find in Queens, New York. You would think It would be easier, but there was only one deli in the vicinity that made it. And fortunately, the guy was from Naples, which is where Sonny is from. So I got the right pasta fazool.
The exact one that he was probably wanting. Yeah, well, no, that's a good way that you got in there. You made your relationship with him, and you got him his meal that he wanted. And then, once they always, they say the way to a man's heart is the food, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So after you got pretty close with him, you started you worked your way into doing these interviews with him, or were you doing that straight off the bat?
Well, actually, before I even met Sonny, I had interviewed 30 people and friends, family members, and enemies. And for the book, I actually interviewed a total of 130 people.
Damn.
And when you call people up about someone, those people are calling Sonny saying, "What's the deal?"
Mm-hmm.
And he never told them not to talk to me.
Really?
If he had told them not to talk to me, he could have shut it down right away.
Mm-hmm.
But he never said, "Don't talk to her." So he knew by the time I finally got to him, he knew I was going to do something with or without him. And people often in that position say, "Okay, I want to have an opportunity to tell my story my way instead of letting other people tell my story."
And, that's the thing, too. I've heard people say, like, if you don't tell your story, someone else is going to do it for you. And, if you don't want it the way that if you're going to be disappointed if you're not part of it. So I think that definitely that aspect in his head, it's like, okay, well, I better hop on this, because, he's 100 some years old. And then, a lot of guys want to get their stories out there sometimes at the end of their life, because then they know, well, I might not get in too much trouble or whatever now, but he served a lot of time. You know what I mean?
Exactly. And that's a very perceptive comment that you made, because people wonder why he talked. And he knew that death wasn't far away, and he wanted to get his story out. And he did.
Well, he picked the right woman for it. So when you started interviewing all these people, these were his family members, ex-mob guys, his sons, and what else did it consist of? Any police officers?
Law enforcement, a lot of law enforcement, because there's this interesting kind of cat and mouse game that goes between the mafia and law enforcement, and law enforcement can be pretty sneaky, just as sneaky as the criminals. And they both tend to be mostly alpha males in this world, not all, but mostly. And there's a mutual respect. And one of the things that was very striking about Sonny, because I've talked to a lot of cops over the years, they don't really admire organized crime guys, but they admired Sonny because he was a stand-up guy. He never rolled on anyone. He lived his beliefs. You may not agree with his principles and his oath to the mafia, but he lived it. Whereas a lot of other mob guys rolled, and he didn't.
No, he never did. He served, what was it, over 50 years in and out of prison throughout his whole life, wasn't it?
He was sentenced to 50 years. In the federal system, you never do the whole bid. And as they say, here I am from Minnesota talking about a bid. And he was paroled 5 times, but he kept on violating his parole because he couldn't help himself. He always hung out with other wise guys, and they'd follow him every time. And he had all sorts of tricks to avoid surveillance, but he got caught and he kept on going back to prison. So ultimately, with that and with the his conviction when he was 93 years old, he served a total of almost 30 years.
Well, still, that's a long time.
It was a long time. And it was also, he was sent away when he was at his peak of his power in the 1960s, because in the 1960s, the mafia really was a huge force in the United States. And he embodied the rise of the American mafia, because he was a guy, some street guys can only hang with street guys. Sonny could mix with civilians, or as his friends put it, squares. And I would be considered a square.
Yeah.
But he was the kind of guy who could move around both worlds very easily, and he did.
Yeah, when I read your book, he, like you said, he was respected by all kinds of different people, and so when he was able to, be able to have relationships with, higher ups, people in different, industries or whatever it may have been, that formed another relationship to make some more money, whether it was legit or not.
Exactly.
But if he wasn't just like some crazy ruthless guy, would you say? Like some of these other guys, you hear of like Vic Amuso, Anthony Casso and stuff, just like straight killers. But I don't think Sonny was just on a very violent path or anything like that. From what I read in your book, I don't think I got that from him.
And I was talking to him later in life when he wasn't so violent, although there was one moment where I asked him about someone and he gave me the look which I've heard other friends describe. It's a look that just drills through you. And I sat there thinking, boy, I better look as stupid as I feel because I have no idea what I just said. And he looked at me and he realized I had no idea what I said, and he relaxed.
Oh.
So he could be scary even at 102 years old in a wheelchair with, a pacemaker and one kidney and one eye. He could still be scary. But his thing was he saw murder as a means to an end, not as an end in and of itself. Some guys just like killing. Carmine Persca, who became the boss of the Colombo crime family, he had a reputation for someone who liked to hurt people. Sonny didn't. For him, it was business. Now, that doesn't justify it.
Right. No.
And at one point, he said to me, well, I never hurt any innocent people. Well, who made you God? Since when do you get to decide who's innocent or not? But he did. Yeah. But for him, violence was a means to an end.
Yeah, and I think that's probably what, with that mindset, you think that's what was able to make him have such longevity in Cosa Nostra, the Mafia, because even if you were a really feared guy, like, but this is different though, like Roy DeMeo, he was the Gambino boss, but he was feared because he was just ruthless in killing. But so, I mean, that's an example of, if you're feared like that, then they're going to take you out. But Sonny, it seems like, he was feared, but he was also respected because in a sense, he wasn't just like, like I was saying just a few minutes ago, he just wasn't ruthless killing people unless he had some legitimate reason in his head what made sense to do so. So I think people find it interesting to hear their kind of mindset that they had and that, say Sonny went through, because I think that's what really brings people's, the audiences, their attention to the whole Mafia and these guys.
Well, I think you're right. And I think that they all think that killing is okay. But I've read a lot of wiretap transcripts, and you should hear him talk. Oh, that guy's crazy. He's just bloodthirsty. He'll kill anyone, And a lot of guys see it as a means to an end. And Sonny, because he was smarter than the average guy, he could pass in civilian life. And also, this was a guy who could hold court with celebrities. He was big in the music industry. He was big in the movie industry. And so he had other interests that he wanted to. And so, that's not the idea of being a bloodthirsty killer like Roy DeMeo, for example. That's not the kind of guy who's going to be embraced by Marilyn Monroe or Alec Baldwin or Joe Namath, as an example, or some of the people who admired Sonny.
That's very true. I think, and the way we can segue into is we'll talk, about the book. Obviously, it was based on Sonny's life, and we could go into his early life that you covered. I mean, they say, I think in the book you said that he committed his first murder at age 14. So
yes. Yeah.
Talk about that, because that's like one of the major key things that happened in his early life that, I mean, stood out to me.
Well, he bragged, and the reason I know about this is he bragged about it on wiretaps. It was in transcripts. And also he told his son, John, and he was very proud of that. Now, he was not... It was a way of getting made, at that time. In order to be a made member of the Mafia, you had to kill someone. And they've sort of relaxed it at different points in history, but typically you have to kill someone in order. And he always wanted to be a mafioso. They did not let people know that Sonny had been made for 2 years because he was so young. So they tried to keep it under wraps.
And he was 14 when he was made, or?
Right, 14. But they didn't let people know till he was 16 that he was actually made.
Wow. And he was made in the Profaci crime family. So that's where he got his early roots. I mean, the Profaci family, for people that don't know, I mean, it would go on to become the Colombo crime family. But he worked his way up in there. I mean, he committed the murder, and then he just had a very rough upbringing, like you said. I mean, when he was growing up, they had 18 siblings. I mean, that's like what do they call that? When they had all the was that generation where they just had all the baby boomers or whatever, like they just all the parents had all these kids and stuff?
I think that's pre-baby boom. They were an immigrant family. They
Oh,
came, and
okay.
his father and mother came from Naples. Now, only 10 of the children survived to adulthood, and so
Damn.
that's also pretty rough to think of brothers and sisters dying at a young age.
Yeah.
And Sonny was also a big fighter on the street. He understood that if he was going to get any credibility, he had to be a fighter. And so his brother would stage fights where Sonny had to be the fighter, the boxer.
Damn.
And by Sonny's telling, he won every fight. He never lost a fight.
Of
Great
course.
stories, but he never lost a fight.
Oh man, that is another funny thing. I mean, so he could have went down a whole different other path as well, though, because I think in your book you talked about him. He could have went and joined the military or the army, but something had occurred, right?
Well, he did. He did join the army because he saw himself as a die-hard patriot, and he said
Okay.
he said to me, "I'm a red-blooded American." He's very proud of that. And he did join the army. He wound up having an affair with the major's wife, of course, Sonny, because he was a great ladies' man and he had affairs throughout his life. But also, he was dishonorably discharged for homicidal tendencies. And so he only spent about a year in the army. And then I said to him, "Well, what'd you do when you got out?" And he said, "Well, I went back out in the street doing what I was doing. I had some businesses going." And so he just kept on building his businesses. And early on, he was a good money maker for the mafia. In the mafia, there are workers and there are earners. Workers are the guys who do the physical violence, the killing, the beatings, and that sort of stuff. The earners are the people who bring in the money. And they're both important. Michael Franzese would have been considered an earner, for example.
Absolutely.
And but Sonny was both. He's both an earner and a worker, and so he was deeply respected.
And he was very smart at hiding his, trying to hide his from the wiretaps and wires and stuff, because he would go into bathrooms and have the water running and whisper in someone's ear. But I mean, still, we would obviously from you've heard the wiretaps and stuff. But I mean, he tried to be as careful as possible, but it's not always going to be foolproof.
Well, he was careful, and he was very careful early in his life. It was only really when he was in his late 80s, when he was 89 years old, when he was trying to set up his youngest son, John. His youngest son, John, for years had a terrible crack cocaine problem and developed HIV after living on the streets for years. And Sonny was worried about him, and he was getting older, and he knew that he wasn't going to have much earning power. So he was trying to set up John in the life. And the sad irony is that John was wearing a wire against his own father.
Yeah, I mean, that is, you don't, we've heard a few cases like that. I mean, you hear the Frank Calabrese Jr. and Frank Calabrese Sr. from the Chicago outfit. There was something that went down, something similar, but a lot of people get surprised when you know that your son flips on the dad, because in that life, I mean, becoming an informant is one thing, but then, doing it on your father is another. So for a lot of them guys, I mean, that was probably a big shocker. But, for Sonny, that's someone that he probably had a lot of trust in, Michael and his son, John. But I mean, that just goes to show how treacherous that, the whole mafia life is. I mean, whether they were born into it or not, I mean, it's just it's a terrible thing. I suppose the whole thing to get involved with. It's just so much backstabbing and treachery.
Well, you're right, and treachery is a really good word. And by the way, Frank Calabrese Jr. he had a pretty fractious relationship with his father. John and Sonny were very close. John adored his father. This wasn't something where he was trying to get back at a father he was angry at. He loved his father. That's what makes it even harder to wrap your head around. And the other thing about treachery, we all work in workplaces where someone might say something behind your back, or they might say something you didn't say, but it's not going to cost you your life.
No.
One slight can change your life or get you killed.
You're absolutely right. And I think you brought up a good point with, you said that, Frank Calabrese Jr., he's trying to get back at his dad. And then Sonny Franzese and his son John Jr., he and when you get drugs and drugs are involved, that's when, people aren't in the right mind and they do things that they would never do. But I mean, that's a, I think that's why, the whole mafia guys, they never wanted to, have anybody doing them or selling them. But as we come to see in history, I mean, there was always people selling them and doing them and stuff. So it's just, again, it's just a whole nother world. But
Well, I asked Sonny once about John. I said, well, what about John? Because I knew how close they were. And he said, I can't answer that. He said, maybe it was the drugs that screwed up his brain, but that's his best explanation for it. It obviously hurt him deeply, but in the end, Sonny being Sonny, he forgave John.
yeah,
It's
and
pretty remarkable.
yeah, and I remember, I think I may have seen some interviews with John or something, or maybe it was from your book. But I remember John went and met with Sonny
Right.
after I think Sonny got out of prison, right? It was.
Well, it was after Sonny got out of prison, and I had written a story about Sonny getting out of prison, and the story and John was in witness protection. After
Yep.
testifying against his father, he went into witness protection, the program that was started because of his father. So there's an irony there.
Yeah.
And he went into witness protection. He developed throat cancer, and he was worried that he was going to die before seeing his family again. My story came out about Sonny's release from prison, and it circulated around the internet. And some people posted, this isn't in the book, so I'm telling you things that are not in the book.
Okay.
Some people posted, I know where John Franzese is living, and I know his witness protection name. And the U.S. Marshals, and they posted it, the U.S. Marshals saw that and said, we got to move you. And the Marshals don't give you a week or 2 weeks or anything. You got to move that day. And John had moved around a lot in the early years of the witness protection program. But after about 10 years, he'd settled into a place. He had made friends. He had built a life. And here he is thinking he's going to die without seeing his family. So he decided to leave witness protection, which was a momentous decision for him. And after that, then he decided to go visit his father because he had freedom of movement. And so he visited his father in a nursing home. And Sonny was really worried. He got really nervous. He sees him. He's worried that other people are going to see him talking to him because, of course, it would be horrible for Sonny to be seen talking to a rat.
Mm-hmm.
And Sonny asked him, he finally asked him, he said, why'd you do it? Why'd you do it? And John said, I wasn't testifying against you, Dad. I was testifying against the life.
Damn.
And he said, well, yeah, but I'm the one who went to prison.
Yeah.
And he said, but you're my son. You've always been crazy, but I still love you.
Damn.
Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, because usually in that life, I mean, you do that, I mean, that you're gonna get whacked, get killed, So for him to be able to actually meet with him and forgive him, but there's obviously a lot more love because I mean, that's John Jr. I mean, he's senior and this is junior. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's the world works in weird ways, but I suppose I think John Jr. came to realization that hey, I need to get out of the life, and then Sonny understood that it maybe was not for him, not John Jr. The life wasn't meant for him or something. But another one too was with Michael and Sonny. They had their relationship, and then didn't Michael get disowned for like 10 years by Sonny? I mean, what was the situation? Was it because Michael left the life, or was it because?
Well, Michael in the late 80s, early 90s, while Sonny was in prison, was set up in a crew that Sonny set him up in.
Mm-hmm.
And he made millions stealing state tax money on gasoline. He literally was bringing bags of money, $250,000 a week to the mob bosses. So, of course, he was a very popular guy. And there was some tension because Michael's mother, Tina, wasn't getting any of that money. She wanted that money, and she would work up Sonny, and Sonny would get mad. So and plus Michael was living very ostentatiously. Sonny never was flamboyant in his style of life. He was a meticulous dresser. He always had cashmere overcoats and French cuffs and cufflinks, but he didn't live in a big splashy mansion or anything like that. And Michael did. And Sonny was worried that he was calling too much attention to himself. Well, sure enough, Michael gets arrested for loan sharking, extortion, racketeering. And he wound up cooperating with authorities. Michael likes to minimize the extent to which he cooperated, but he provided federal and state investigators with information on mob bosses all over the country. Michael likes to say he only testified against one guy, Norby Walters, who was a music and sports agent who recently died. And he said, I only testified against Norby Walters, and he wasn't a made guy. Who cares about Norby Walters? Well, Norby cares about Norby Walters.
Yeah.
But the truth is, he did provide information about a lot of people. I talked to the detectives who debriefed him, so he absolutely did. So he and Sonny had a serious falling out. But again, at the end of his life, and Michael is a very wealthy man. He's a successful businessman. In addition to being an evangelical pastor, he started a lot of businesses, and he's a smart guy. But he never gave his father any money at the end of his life. But Sonny said, I can't complain about Michael. He was a good son. He was a good son, and that's how he left it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's just when, that's just that father-son relationship. You guys go through falling outs, arguing, and all kinds of stuff throughout life. And then you throw in the mafia life in it. I mean, it's just a whole nother thing. But
that's true.
Yeah. No, I remember seeing, so John Jr. met with his father before he passed away. And then Michael did as well, too, I think for, I don't know what year it would have been, 2016, 15, or I don't even know. I remember seeing it.
I think it was 2019, but
okay.
Even though they both did, neither one of them attended the funeral.
Why do you think that is?
I think they were worried about getting killed.
Huh. Yeah, because there probably would have been a lot of wise guys and all kinds of different people there, but
it was in Brooklyn, and neither one of them showed up.
Damn. Yeah. Well, I suppose that's just what do you call it? The side effects of the life, the mafia life. But yeah, no. Did Sonny ever mention to you anything about being a part of any of the Colombo Wars? Because I'm sure he was around for all three of them, unless he was in prison.
Well, he was. He did not talk about that because remember, he never acknowledged the mafia to me. Now, and I should point out, I met him in person when he was 101 years old. He was completely lucid. He was funny. He was charming. He was physically falling apart, but his mind was very, very sharp. And he was very cagey about mentioning the mafia, because of course, in that life, you can't even acknowledge it. So he did not talk about the Colombo Wars, but in each of them, and one of the reasons Sonny rose so high in the hierarchy, he was a mediator. And he was one of the few guys that both sides trusted, because they knew Sonny's word was good. And, another thing that set Sonny apart, and this I heard over and over and over again, his men were very loyal to him because he let them make money and he was honest and fair with them. A lot of these mob bosses are not, not Castellano. Paul Castellano was hated because he was seen as greedy. Profaci was seen as greedy. And a lot of these guys are, the money goes to their head. And that's the other thing. Michael talks about this. When you become made, yeah, it's great because you get access to a lot of schemes and you can make money and you're protected. You can't kill a made guy unless you get permission from the bosses.
Right.
But you also got to kick up a lot of money to the bosses, and if you're not made, yeah, you kick up some money, but you're not obligated to kick up the money.
No. Right. Yeah, so I mean that is a good point though. That's why his men would stay loyal to him, and throughout all the internal beefs and stuff, he remained to stay alive because like the Gambino boss, you said Paul Castellano, he got murdered by his underlings, John Gotti and Sammy the Bull and their whole crew they put together, and that just goes to show, like, again, Sonny knew how to navigate through the mafia life. That's why he had longevity. And I did want to discuss with you too about, he had a few bank robbery cases, and one was, okay, how many bank robbery cases did he have?
Well, and he had a few cases. He had one bank robbery case. And what's unusual about Sonny is that in a single year, he was indicted by the feds, the Queens DA, the Manhattan DA, and the Nassau County DA. And I've read a lot of court records over my years as an investigative reporter. I've never seen one man be the subject of so many cases in 1 year. It was extraordinary. I've never seen it before or since. And he, as he liked to say, I beat 3 of the cases, but the one case he couldn't beat was the bank robbery case. And this was a case in which 4 bank robbers said that Sonny directed this conspiracy to rob banks across the country. And Sonny claimed he didn't know the guys, he wasn't involved. They testified. And what's critical is they testified in 3 of the cases. So the other cases were there was the murder of Ernie the Hawk Rapolo, who was a one-eyed hitman whose body showed up in Jamaica Bay. And the other case was a home invasion on Long Island where 2 teenagers were tied up in the basement while their home was robbed. The third one was a bookmaking case, and then the fourth one was the bank robbery. So these same bank robbers were key witnesses in all the cases. And the fact that they were allowed to testify and lived led a lot of people to believe that their testimony was sanctioned by another mob boss. And the theory was that Carlo Gambino gave them permission to testify.
Who were the 4 people that did testify on him? Do you recall their names?
I remember Blackie Zare, Jimmy Smits, John Cordero, and I should know the 4th one. Let me look at it. You know what? Let me look at my book. I got it right here. It's been a while since I wrote. Oh, so it was. All right. I can't believe that I don't have their name. Oh, Jimmy Smits. Oh, Richard Parks, Blackie Zare, and John Cordero. Those are the 4.
Okay.
And, these were drug addicts. These were guys who would not normally hang around with a guy of Sonny's stature. And that's one of his arguments. Like, I would never talk to these guys, but he took money from the robberies. And so under the law, he was implicated. And I go back and forth. Was he involved or not? And one thing that Michael says, Michael believes he was innocent of the bank robberies.
Oh, yeah.
But he was convicted of planning them and, telling these guys what to do. But Michael said, listen, Dad, yeah, they framed you, but they didn't go after you because you're a priest or a teacher. They went after you because you're a bad guy. And there's a certain logic to that. But I'm not sure that he was framed.
Well, and the thing is, too, I keep saying it in all my interviews that with these other mafia guys is like, they pose for the picture, you know what I mean, for the government to want to go and indict them. They're like, okay, well, if we can't get him for this, we'll throw that on him and see if that sticks. And it should. We'll make it happen, and people will believe it. So whether it was true in Sonny's case or not, I suppose we will never know. I guess we don't. I don't know. I don't know. For me, like if the government, if they hide anything, I mean, that's just you can't really tell. I mean, it's hard as hell. I
agree.
To go in there.
I don't know. I haven't come down. As I said, I've gone back and forth on it. And I'm less, I guess these days I tend to think that, Sonny never turned down money. And it became his downfall later in life when he got out of prison. He had done his time. John is wearing the wire, but also Guy Furtado, who was an up-and-comer, a street hustler Sonny wanted to mentor. And he opened a club, and Sonny was talking to him. And every week, Guy Furtado gave him an envelope of money. And that money came from the FBI.
Really?
Sonny didn't know that. But the FBI was giving Furtado the money to give Sonny so Furtado could wear a wire and get Sonny to say things.
And that's how they would be able to indict him for that. To get it. Okay. Yeah, and with his case too, with the bank robbery, one I wanted to touch on. So you said you knew Salvatore Polisi, the Colombo associate. So I wanted to. What was his uncle's connection, from your knowledge, with this bank robbery case?
Well, his uncle was in Sonny's crew, Anthony Polisi, and he was initially charged with the bank robbery, and then the feds kind of did a sleight of hand, and then they charged Sonny because, of course, Sonny was the bigger guy. And Sal believes absolutely that those guys framed Sonny. He is adamant that they framed Sonny. And Anthony Polisi had a club where these bank robbers hung out. I think the room was called the John Doe room. And so he was absolutely in the mix.
Right. Okay. So he wasn't one of the people that were testifying or anything like that.
Oh,
No,
no.
it was
No. He did not testify against Sonny. And
no.
Sal Polisi knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. No, I mean me and him are going to go into a whole episode on our other podcast about that, and we're going to start interviewing other guests and stuff. So probably be good to have you on there to talk about this with Sal if you want to ever do another one with him.
Sure.
But going back to Sonny's his whole case and stuff. I mean, he eventually ended up getting. How much time did he serve in prison for this one?
He was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
Right.
And he hated the judge, Mishler, who sentenced him. He said to me, "I'll meet him in hell."
Really?
And this he said to me at 102 years old. Damn. And Michael Franzese was accused of plotting to kidnap the judge's daughter. That came out after, and the case kept on coming back to Mishler, the various appeals, and he denied all of them. And after he had denied, I guess, the last appeal, a threat came into the law clerk, Mishler's law clerk, and said, "You're going to be sorry for what you did." And there was a threat to kidnap his daughter. So Mishler was a pretty tough guy too. I'll tell you, Sonny wrote letters from prison to the judge. And he wrote a letter several years after his sentence. And he said to him, "Give me a lie detector test. Just whatever you want. I can prove my innocence to you." And I read that letter and I thought, for Sonny to humble himself, to write a judge respectfully, particularly a man he hated, made me wonder, well, maybe he is innocent.
Yeah.
And there's a guy, Marty Tankleff, who was falsely accused of killing his parents. And one of the things he says, which I think is true, he says, you can always tell the innocent guys in prison because they're always writing a lot of letters to get themselves out. And Marty was the master letter writer. He wrote letters to everybody, and he ultimately was exonerated. But that's his take on things.
Yeah, and I mean it's true. I think there was a few mafia guys that were exonerated for being wrongfully convicted in the Patriarca family when Joe Barbosa. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he was a hitman that turned informant. He put away 4 guys for a few decades almost, and then they found out that the government and him had worked together to just point these guys and say, hey, they did it. But it wasn't the case at all. And 2 of the guys died in prison, and then the other 2 came out and they were given money for being in there so long. So you can I mean, even if some of these guys were criminals and they were in prison for something that they didn't do, they still, I mean, in the the law, you're supposed to have the right to a fair trial and stuff. But so that's why some of these guys, they just get taken off the street and they're not even guilty. But like we'll keep saying, they pose for the picture, and it just makes it easy for everyone to say, yeah, well, they probably did do it.
Well, you're right, but a bedrock of our democracy is that we have fairness in the law, justice for all. And Sonny was a killer. He was a ruthless criminal. And he said to me over and over, I was a bad guy. He was unashamed of it. But he did not deserve to go to prison for something he didn't do. Now, I'm not saying he didn't plot those bank robberies. As I said, I'm still not 100% sure.
Right.
But no one should go to prison for something they didn't do.
Right. I mean, that's what they're supposed to get you in the act doing something some other kind of way. But I mean, some of the feds, they just really, I suppose, really want to get these guys. They'll, they think about it. They're just like, oh shit, I got to get this guy somehow. So then they do that or something.
I will say this. I've never run across someone in law enforcement at the federal level who has set someone up or tried to falsify evidence. I'm not saying it hasn't happened. I've just never seen it personally.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing. So,
yeah,
I mean,
because
I mean, that's just a little small percentage. I'm sure it's not. Oh yeah, the whole organization shouldn't just like, there's always going to be bad apples with every group of people. I mean, that's just what it is. But Sonny definitely lived a long life, and he was one of the OGs of the mafia that you got to meet. So, I mean, I thought, it'd be a great, you'd be a great guest to have on. So that's why, I wanted to bring you on and, tell your story. Is there any other things that went into this book that you'd like to talk about? Like that might have been like you, how we talked about in the beginning, you were the first woman to write a book about the mafia boss. Was there any other cool fun facts like that as well?
Well, it's hard. I think that for me, the fun facts is that the mafia was deeply involved in the music industry in the 1960s, and
Hmm.
that Sonny was involved in the movie industry. You don't normally think that. And Sonny was a big promoter of Black musicians, Black artists,
Hmm.
because at the time they couldn't get funding for their records. They couldn't get anyone to listen to them. And Sonny, for him, money was money. But Sonny had a really good ear. He
Hmm.
really was, he liked talent. He really respected talent. He wasn't the kind of mob boss who would put his girlfriend, give my, untalented girlfriend a job as a singer.
Yeah.
He wanted real talent and he went after it. And so he was the kind of guy who could have been a great boss in civilian life.
Yeah, I mean, he with his careers and stuff that he made too, or in these connections with all these people. I mean, he helped out. I mean, that like you said, he gave people opportunities that didn't have opportunities that back in that era, that whole time. The African American stuff that they weren't getting because people just didn't respect him and they didn't want to give him a chance. Well, you know what? They go to Sonny and he will, and so I mean, that's a good thing that he did to help them out. I mean, whether all the other stuff that he did was terrible, but I mean, he did a few, some good things to help out these other people that needed an opportunity. So that's where the whole mafia comes in as well. Like people don't want to give certain people a loan or something, then they go to these guys and they'll give it to them or help them out with the business or help them out with if someone's causing trouble in the neighborhood and they'll take care of it, kind of thing. That was back then. I mean, I don't know about now how everything works, but it
Oh,
might all be
they're
different.
still around. I mean,
They are pretty.
people think that it's gone away. They've gotten a lot quieter, but they're still very
Mhm.
much around.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose they, like you said, they're more quieter. You don't really hear about their cases or, a murder taking place or something because it's just, they seen from the past all this horrible stuff that happened, all this attention, media, and, you go and kill a mafia boss, alleged mafia boss, and he gets murdered, and, the people that's going to draw a lot of attention be like, okay, well, these guys are still active. So that's
Exactly.
why I think they've learned a lot from their past mistakes, wouldn't you think?
Well, I think you're right, and these are smart guys. These are really, particularly the upper echelon of the mafia. These are smart guys. A
Hmm.
lot of street guys, they're not so smart. They're not so interesting. But as with any company, as people rise up through the ranks, you're going to get the smarter people up there.
That's true.
And that's why it's so threatening to law enforcement. And since 9/11, law enforcement has really scaled back its resources in fighting the mafia and other types of organized crime. And they've really been focused on terrorism. But
Hmm.
now you're seeing gangs reemerge. At least I certainly see that in New York, but it's not necessarily organized crime. I've seen a lot of issues with the Bloods and MS-13 and stuff like that. And that's becoming a target of law enforcement.
Hmm. Yeah, I could see why they would want to do that and to really figure out how they can stop, these guys at the top because they're smart. They could have been anything, but they went, on that non-legit path, and now they're doing all these horrible things or these horrible deals that, shouldn't be taking place. But I mean, you can never stop crime and stuff. So I mean, you can. I mean, there'll never be no crime in the world. So there. I mean, that's why we need law enforcement. They keep on attacking it, but if we didn't, it'd just be a horrible frenzy of bad crap going on.
Exactly. That's a good way of putting it. I like a horrible frenzy of bad crap going on.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I do appreciate you coming on my show and taking out 45 minutes of your time. Where can the people find your book?
Well, you can find the book on Amazon. It's called Sonny, the last. I'm shaking it. The last of the old time mafia bosses, John Sonny Franzese. It's published by Citadel Kensington Publishing, And one of my favorite parts, it's not this, I don't have it in this book, but a lot of great pictures. I don't know if you looked at the pictures, but Sonny was a handsome guy. And there are a lot of great pictures from the era that I like a lot.
Yeah, and I think that's good that you're able to incorporate them and give people a visual on what Sonny was and all the people that he was around. And because you could hear the stories and stuff, but then when you see the visuals, like, okay, I can put a face to that name now.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
But I will say this too. I left a great review on there, and anybody and anybody that enjoys the whole mafia genre and reading mafia books, just true crime, I would highly recommend reading Sandra's book because I found it very interesting, and she really did her homework. She did 130 plus interviews on all these people, so she really put a lot of time and work into this, and she was able to form a relationship with Sonny. Not a lot of people could have covered his story, but I think he picked the right person for it.
Well, thank you. And I hope other people read it too.
No, I know they will.
What did everyone think? Sandra is a very informative person when it comes to Sonny Franzese. She is a phenomenal writer and speaker. I hope everyone enjoyed this interview. Please comment a key takeaway that you got from this interview. Please share it with anyone that you think will enjoy this kind of content. Also, please don't forget to hit subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'll put Sandra's book in the video description as well. If you want to support me and my clothing brand, I'll be sure to include that in the video description. The last thing that I'll bring up is my Mafia playlist. If you like this interview, I know you'll like all my other interviews that are related to the Mafia. Thank you again for watching.